If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe, follow, and rate on your preferred podcast platforms. If you'd like to reach out to me, simply connect to me on Twitter. Links in the description.
Even if you don't have active solutions for them, but you've just listened to them, they just feel a lot more supported, which is true for each one of us, because at the end of it, we're all, sort of wanting for a listening ear to be there for us.
This is Pragya Lodha. She is a practicing clinical psychologist in Mumbai, working with more than 8 national and international organizations. She teaches psychology to diploma and postgraduate students in addition to being a researcher with more than 100 national and international publications. In this episode, we talk about internet addiction, geriatric mental health, and stigma. Here's my conversation with Pragya Lodha. Can you tell us why you chose a career in mental health? What were your early encounters with this subject, and why do you continue to work in mental health?
My journey in mental health began with a little bit of, I think I would say, confusion and being a little lost. But one thing that I was sure of was that I wanted to work with people. I wanted to understand behavior. And since this was a field, I think somewhere I was always driven to take up psychology as a beginning subject to understand things better. So I'd say that I always had that little bit of bend towards humanity, and also that it comes, I think, from my mom as well, who's also been a student of human development and early child care. So I'd say it's partly genetic and partly something that also interests me. And something that continues and drives my motivation and passion to grow in the area of mental health is that it's absolutely heartwarming to sit with another person you don't absolutely know anything about, listen to them, and listen to them as if you are creating one of the safest spaces around them. And what, of course, I am left with as a practicing mental health professional is extremely heartwarming, very rewarding, uh, very, very special, I would say, as an experience. So apart from it just simply being a profession, I think it's increased the learning curve of myself as a person. I've learned a lot from each and every person that I have interacted in my journey of becoming a mental health professional, be it my fellow classmates, my mentors, my colleagues, the people I've worked with, my patients. They've added so much value in my life. And this is one aspect of my life, I'd say, Nitin, that I wake up every day to look forward to the day as to who am I interacting with, what am I interacting about. It's a subject that keeps my uh, brain constantly stimulated. It's challenging, it's something that I have to constantly think about. And I think personally I'm somebody who likes to not remain stagnant but constantly keep doing something or the other, finding out something. I do have a greater sort of quest for curiosity and knowing and understanding better, which I think does get fulfilled by what I do. So I think it's a mix of all these things that brings and drives rather my passion in the field of mental health.
That's really nice. It's almost like a two-way. You help people, but in turn, those experiences are also helping you, which is pretty nice.
Right.
Uh, how would you define internet addiction? What are the most common illnesses associated with this? And what about internet addiction in India? How does it look like, and who among the population are most affected by it?
Internet addiction, as of now, if we say, hasn't really been classified as a formal disorder, but it certainly is a challenging condition that we are facing with our I generation. So, as we call our Gen Z people who are basically very, very digital and technology savvy. Usually, internet addiction, like I said, because it's not a disorder, it may not necessarily have a comorbid psychiatric illness or psychological problem, but it has been found to commonly coexist with various conditions, right? From having normal day to day stress to depression to anxiety to sometimes looking at more severe spectrum of disorders such as eating disorders, panic disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, sometimes very commonly also seen in people with schizophrenia as well, and maybe bipolar disorder as well. So we can name it and it can be there, because internet addiction is understood better as a behavioral problem. It's also referred to as a behavioral addiction. But if you look at, there are actually two schools of sort of researchers who believe in, a, there is a school that believes in that behavioral addictions are there, and behavioral addictions could be, like internet addiction or food addiction or bodybuilding addiction or Facebook addiction, versus there is another school that says that no, these aren't really sort of disorders enough to per se classify them formally. So I've already spoken about the comorbid illnesses, but something that I would say is that though it may not be a formal disorder, it definitely is a phenomenon that needs more attention because it's on the rise. Especially, I think if we look at the present pandemic situation as well, digital screen time has been one of the highest concerns amongst parents, amongst adults, because we all, in some way or the other, have actually been pushed and forced to be using our screens too much. So, it is certainly a phenomenon that needs to be addressed before it becomes too much of a problem. As part of experience, I would say that we also, as practitioners, have seen where youngsters had to be brought to the hospital facility because of video game addictions, or just constantly being on the screen as well and playing games on smartphone applications as well. These are also something that fall under internet addiction as a broader category of behavioral addictions as well. So it definitely is a problem, and though, like I said, it may not be a disorder, it definitely needs attention, where it requires not just regulated use of digital devices and the internet, but it also calls for establishing and sort of imbibing healthy digital habits on a day to day basis.
So I think the best way is to prevent it by self lecturing or self conditioning. But suppose you mentioned one case where a kid was brought to a clinic. Can you talk about some clinical solution, if they're set up, and what kind of solutions they offer?
Usually, well, I think if somebody's got to the clinic and, even if they are not primarily got for complaints of internet addiction or video game addiction or any sort of, digital addiction, it might be a coexisting phenomenon. Something that's used very often as part of therapy is that there are behavioral techniques used that could be, say, maybe lifestyle modification, self regulation, bringing in a little bit of discipline, routine, scheduling, something called as token economy or reward systems, which are used to basically regulate these behaviors. There is no medicine per se that treats the internet addiction. Medicines are usually given for coexisting problems, which could sometimes be, say, maybe, for example, depression that may have kicked in, or anxiety that may have set in, or, for example, even uncontrollable impulsivity or anger that may seem a little difficult to manage uh, only with therapy.
Uh, what about from a research point of view? What are the challenges in investigating and studying these behaviors? Can you talk about some methods and tools used in research and challenges associated with them?
Right. Research wise, I think this is one of the, I would say, hot areas of research. There's a lot of research that's happening. And especially during the COVID, it's been also under focus. And the only thing is that, of course, that this is more of a continued process because there are so many challenges. Because if we look at research literature, there is a lot of diversity in the way how, say, maybe a particular study, like, the sample they use, the amount of time used on internet, the purpose of use of internet, uh, of how many tablets or how many, if you say, digital devices have been used for the internet purpose. So there can be various sort of moderating variables that can be a part of research, and it's not always possible to control all of them. Even at a socio demographic level, studying internet use or internet dependence in urban versus rural areas, in men versus women, amongst different genders, among different age groups, among different professional groups, different countries. These are all absolute nuances that definitely have to be kept in mind while we interpret the results of any study. There are lots and lots of scales that are available, that are used as, maybe, self, mostly they are self rating scales, where the individual can themselves answer and report what their usage of internet is. There are some scales that simply look at internet use. There are some scales that look at internet dependence. There are some scales that look at the purpose of use of internet. Scales on Facebook addiction as well, video game addiction, the individual is facing difficulty in day-to-day lives. So those are just some of the ways how individuals can undertake and sort of understand objectively where they stand when it comes to use of internet. Are they really dependent on it or no? However, as a mental health professional, I'd rather say that it's always better to not self diagnose, because that's usually slightly harmful, because we take in information relatively more negatively that way. Always good to step up, speak to a professional, get an idea. And little bit of behavioral therapy done along with little bit of lifestyle modification definitely helps. And it's not like that. I mean, there is a lot of research that talks about various things. There are sometimes CBT is used, sometimes simply awareness is used, sometimes supportive therapy is used, sometimes behavioral techniques are used. So all of these therapeutic ways have been found to be effective in dealing with internet addiction as a phenomenon. But of course, with research, I think this is standard that there is always need for more research. So, like talked about the two schools of thought prevailing about behavioral addictions as an umbrella term, I think that continues to be there. There is still debate and talk about whether internet addiction should formally become a disorder or no, because as of now, it is there in one of the unspecified disorders in the DSM-5, where internet addiction disorder is there, and there's also gambling disorder. So, though of course, like I said, that they don't classify for formal clinical diagnosis, they don't warrant any sort of medication, but they are phenomenon or behaviors that are clinically important enough to warrant attention in order to do something better to be able to prevent further harm.
Uh, Companies like Google and Facebook are actively investing in India, uh, bringing internet access and social media to more Indians. And this seems to be targeted towards the 50-60% of Indian population, or majority being in the rural part of India. Since we know so much about what's happening in the urban space, how can we use that to ensure the next 50% of Indian users have a positive outcome? Is there some kind of collaboration with these companies that need to happen? Some policies, like you mentioned before?
Um, I think one thing is nothing that the world is going digital, and digitalization is only going to increase in the coming time. And especially, I think having experienced the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown, digitalization is only more hurried and is going to go more big with time. Though that is something that cannot be prevented because it's looked at more from I think a business point of view, profit point of view, globalization point of view, development growth, etc. points of view, where it's more of something that's there to help people, companies, and the world grow. One thing that definitely needs to take space and consideration is optimal use of the same. And something that I would also like say is I think even the whole understanding of internet addiction in itself is a phenomenon will also have to go through a rigorous sort of reevaluation, because something that I recollect from doing a small study that I did back in 2018, it reflected that internet addiction may not necessarily be addiction, but today, I mean, all our lives have gone digital, where simple things like, I mean, listening to music or reading the newspaper or reading books or paying bills, buying things online, they all push us to the digital platform and usage, which does not really necessitate that it could be something pathological or a problem. So, as far as we're able to regulate our use, as far as we're able to balance it with other things in life, as far as we don't feel too dependent on it, or feel like I cannot move ahead with this, or I'm not engaging socially at the cost of being involved in my digital devices or using the internet, then I think it is a very normative phenomenon for all of us. And I think, especially, I would again like to highlight the lockdown, that, in the lockdown, I think we've been working online, we've been doing entertainment online, we've been studying online, we've been carrying out all our daily chores online. So I think this will call for a rigorous reevaluation, like I said, for the concept of internet addiction in itself, because the value, the threshold that lied, say maybe some years back, the concept was first formalized by Kimberly Young in the 1990s. So it's definitely going to need more, sort of reconsideration, that, what is normal today. And it's a lifestyle phenomenon. So as lifestyle changes, it will also have to undergo construction, reconstruction, to see that what does it really mean. So policies thus will have to be made accordingly. But as of now, I don't think there are any governmental or unilateral digital policies to sort of speak about controlling internet addiction. Of course, there are, at small scales, there are organizations working on digital health, or maybe doctors that may speak about it, but it hasn't really reached the mainstream guidelines of health yet.
What are some of the illnesses affecting the elderly population of India uh, that are assumed to be age related, but in fact mental health issues?
One thing is that there are a lot of challenges that do come as a part of aging as well. And there is a lot of misunderstanding of these problems. Like, for example, if we look at the second most vulnerable group to witness the highest number of suicide rates is the geriatric population. Depression among geriatrics is far more gone amiss because it's considered to be a part of how they age and how, post retirement life looks like. Dementia and Alzheimer's related disorders are far less understood amongst the elderly, which is extremely commonly seen in so many elderlies. There is lack of awareness and lack of attention to geriatric mental health in general. So, a lot of the loss of ability, the loss of independence, and various other normal phenomenon that the elderly go through as a part of physiological aging and transition are sometimes not given enough attention, which can sometimes, sort of escalate into psychiatric problems or psychological distress. Most often, what also happens is that because mental health is not really spoken about, it could simply be a carry on from sometimes childhood or even adulthood, that the problem continues to remain. In general, uh, the geriatric do face a lot of challenges otherwise as well, post retirement they do feel dependent. They have a sudden working in them and a lot of company to be there. Physically they age, so they become more fragile. They need sometimes more care. It may not necessarily happen with every aging individual, but it is commonly seen. And I think there is lack of sensitivity in just addressing geriatric health, unless and until it's something grave enough that warrants medical attention. And a lot of times, ignorance of these subtle changes that are a part of normal aging, when they are ignored, that's what leads to developing psychological distress as well, which could later escalate to mental health problems. So I think I would say a awareness, b sensitivity and empathy, and d making ourselves a little more learned about what geriatric mental health is are some good steps to take at an individual level to understand and better address geriatric mental health problems.
Uh, in one of the papers that you co-authored, you talk about how social factors among the elderly, like employment and family relations, is one of the challenges with the mental health issue. Uh, do you think it's more difficult to solve these social issues uh, than working on uh, mental health cure or uh, therapy? Uh, because these two seem to be, or the social challenges seems to be quite difficult with, you have to consider employment, financial issues. So how do these two challenges fit together, and uh, can you talk about them?
Sure. I think if we looked at and addressed these problems from a societal level, they would be far more conducive to a better mental health for the elderly, where we understand that, okay, there is a certain transition that comes for everyone at some point in life. And it is something which is going to be a very expected part. So, little bit of preparedness, little bit of emotional support, being supportive by simply spending time for them, making them feel included and not just sort of sidelining them or sidelining what they say is important. Because one of the things is also that a lot of generation gap caters to lack of understanding, misunderstandings, communication gaps, not being on the same page, viewpoint differences, etc., etc., which do cause for a lot of maybe interpersonal level problems as well. But I think individually as well as a society, we need to understand that we all are going to reach that stage at some point. Empathy is very important to understand that there are certain stages of life that come because they come as a part of life, and us becoming and growing more sensitive to sensitive just helps us live more harmoniously, more inclusively without doing injustice to a certain subsection of the elderly. I think reprioritizing elderly health, the importance of elderly in the family is something that control, say maybe nuclear families or loss of employment or globalization leading to, like the emptiness syndrome and things like that. But as a society, we can always come ahead and do what we can do. A simple gesture of help, empathy, just listening to them, trying to also take that one extra step of understanding their perspective are some simple things that we can do to simply provide enough emotional support to the elderly. And in general, of course, that the mental health care fraternity, I wouldn't say that it lacks in providing visible attention and research mental health.
Uh, so, so traditional family models that we see in India, with strong relations and interdependency, looks like a good solution for geriatric mental health. Uh, but how can this coexist with modern lifestyles and challenges with modern lifestyles in families? Is there something that you know from practice where you've seen challenges in the family structure?
I think, like I mentioned, that one cannot actively control for how family structures evolve over periods of time because everybody, as a global community, there are reasons for change and evolution that take place. But the thing is, of course, having that empathic stance of including and understanding the elderly population will make a very big difference in the way how people are deciding to have families. Another thing is that there is a lack of infrastructure to support geriatric mental health. There are old age homes, there are rehabilitation centers, there are daycare centers, 24 hours, like caring centers. But the quality of it, the staff, what kind of treatment is given to the elderly is something that is far, far neglected and definitely needs a lot more attention. Another thing that can be rather done is that increasing therapeutic support, community living and community support is one to help an elderly carry some bags in your own society, or maybe just sometimes exchanging a warm smile or a greeting to them, or something that I would share simply from my experience is that sometimes uh, you know even if you don't have active solutions for them, but you've just listened to them, they just feel a lot more supported, which is true for each one of us, because at the end of it, we're all sort of wanting for a listening ear to be there for us. Just I think sitting with them, spending some time with them, helps them also feel as much a part of the family, because one of the things that comes with old age is that the person starts feeling that they are not needed anymore, which is not really the case, because the thing is that because of their agility, they may not be able to be as swift, they may not be able to be as quick as other people. But I think this is where we need to bring in a little bit of sensitization and understand that differences are going to be there, and one can work towards accommodating these differences at an individual level at least. And I think that's one of the best places to start at, because if we just took care of our families, I think institutionally it would become far more easy to facilitate and cater to other individuals.
Uh, it's unfortunate that social stereotypes not only give rise to mental health issues, but it may also hinder access to mental health care and might demotivate those who are undergoing therapy. Can you talk about what stigma is and how it affects people who are willing to reach out for help while also preventing some to even consider mental health care?
Right. I think stigma is one of the most ongoing challenges when it comes to mental health. And the other thing is that stigma gets bolder and stronger when we look at intersectionalities. For example, if we're looking at gender and mental health, caste and mental health. So, I mean, for example, if you're a homosexual individual with mental health problems, it's a double edged sword for you. If you're somebody from an ostracized caste or a minority caste, it's again a double edged sword for that person to reach out for mental health support. So, however, I believe that stigma is something that will continue to evolve and exist in different layers as and when time and societies grow. It may not completely eradicate entirely because stigma is not just present at the systemic level, but it's also prevalent at a very individualistic level. Even if mental health support does not near and dear ones, that is also breaking stigma. One thing that needs to be understood is that to be able to deshackle stigma does not necessarily mean that we have to go loud and bold and big about it. It can be done at a very quiet and subtle level as well. So, every step that individuals take to talk about mental health, to stand up for mental health, and to support mental health is a step towards breaking stigma. So, I think that's how I'd like to put it across.
Uh, I have some questions that I ask my guests on every episode. So, what are you currently working on in your career and in your life?
Presently, well, I think I'm doing more of private practice, which is to see people for therapy sessions. I'm also teaching and doing research side by side. That's how it's always been. So I continue to do so. My area of interest definitely lies more with youth mental health and geriatric mental health.
Uh, can you name some books that bring value to you?
Um, well, I think one thing that I would say is that I usually read everything from, like, poetry to ghazals to romantic novels to science, purely scientific academic books. Um, some books that I would say that left, uh, a great impact on me as a person. But I'll give you a mix of some books that I can recollect of. I think one of the first books would be A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khalil Gibran. That was one of those books which I actually sat and finished it one go. Books by Stephen Hawking have always caught my attention. Uh, I've also really enjoyed reading the philosophy of Sir Jiddu Krishnamurti and Dr. Kendall, who speaks about the disordered mind and the psychopathology and how it manifests. Um, there's another book called Fooled by Randomness, which is also something that I like, and I always sort of come back to. Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman is another book that I also hold very close to my interest. Apart from that, I've thoroughly enjoyed reading books on dream analysis, psychoanalysis, Indian psychoanalysis, and death and dying. Sudhir Kakkar is one of the persons I definitely look up to when it comes to dreams, talking about death, talking about Indian psychoanalysis, and of course, the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. Another person I really like to read is also Carl Jung. He is a mix of philosophy and psychology. Uh, so that is there. I also do enjoy reading existential psychology and existential philosophy as well. So I think these are some of the things that come first to my mind. So yeah.
You talked quite a bit about empathy and kindness. So, on that topic, what are some values in life that are important to you?
First, I would just say I think acknowledgement of human beings, however they are, just really, really learning to acknowledge them. One thing that I think I've learned is that we mustn't really try to control people, change them, but rather try to accept them and embrace them how they are if we can do that. So I think acceptance is something that I truly, truly practice it myself and also work upon it with the people, be it my students, be it the patients I see. So acceptance is one of the most core values that I hold close to my heart. And apart from that, I would say altruism is something that I believe in. uh, I would also say that I'm learning and taking my own journey in the on the path of spirituality. It is too vast to be able to figure out in a lifetime, but yeah, I think I'm there, and I think that that does talk about just mindful acceptance, becoming aware of yourself, and becoming aware of everything around you, every individual, everything living, non-living, and like I said, altruism is the second value that I hold dearly to myself, where a beautiful line excerpt that comes to my mind is I was reading this book on altruism by by a Buddhist saint. I'm forgetting his name, but he said that the sun falls on all of the earth, but there are some, if you look at some places, they are more hotter versus some are not. And altruism is like that you are altruistic towards everyone. It's just that the people closer to you in your life, in your life circle, they experience more altruism from you. But it does not mean that altruism is restricted to there. It's a emotion, it's a behavior that you do with everyone, irrespective of whether you know them or you don't know them. So I think acceptance and altruism are two things that weave a lot of other emotions and values into it.
Finally, where can people find out more about you and your work?
LinkedIn, I think that's the best place. Or if they want to get in touch, they can always email me. My email address is there on LinkedIn, so that's the best place.
Uh, I'm glad that there's so much work being done in mental health research and therapy, and also by the public in fighting stigma and creating awareness. So, I thank you and everyone in this space for what I think is important. Uh, and this was really interesting. Thank you for taking time to speak with me.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you for holding this space.